worked out downstairs in the old Melville building. It was nice. I liked, I was really crazy about my boss.
And you worked for who?
James M. O'Brien. I was married to James Garvey, who lived across the street from the library.
Oh.
And we were about to go on our honeymoon, and I happened to mention to my mother-in-law, oh, by the way, they're going to close the library. And she didn't really respond in one way or another, but we went on a honeymoon. We came back, and then we found out that she and Ina Kunzer had gone out with petitions all over Melville. They got every single child that went to the school next door, Songkwan Elementary School, to sign these petitions.
To keep it open.
To keep it open, to save it, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I found this out when we got back from our honeymoon. I said, oh no, my mother-in-law did this. It was just the best time in my life, really. I loved it.
The staff seemed like a family atmosphere.
Yeah, that's how it was,
Nice.
I said the only patron I really kind of knew her name was Ina Kunzer, who was very famous in Melville, evidently. I didn't really know her, but when they used to see her walking to the library, oh, Mrs. Kunzer's coming.
I remember when I was on the library board, being here sometimes till 3 in the morning
For meetings.
for meetings.
Now, what year did you join the board? Were you elected?
1971.
71. Is there a specific person in the library that had a positive influence on your life?
I would say Dr. Anthony Uzo, who was a member of the board and for a good number of years was president of the board. He's one of the most brilliant men I've ever met. He was the greatest library proponent I ever met. He loved libraries. And he said, anything I want to know, I just go to my library. And one day he bought what's a small octopus, a squid or something like that. Didn't know how to cook it. He said, I went to the library. I found out how to cook it. He was a nonstop, he was on fast forward. Whenever he died, he really got 20 more years of life in the lifespan that he had.
Nice you knew him.
Oh yeah, so he's one of my fondest memories, Tony.
My parents moved here and took residence on April 1st of 1947.
Wow.
So I was only 6 months old, so that would make me really 72 when we moved here. And
tell me about that house you mentioned.
yes, my father there was a sign apparently on the property. There was a building. It was an abandoned schoolhouse.
But it had been used
But it had been used as a schoolhouse.
Do you remember the name of it?
Yes, and it was called Apollo Hills. My favorite memory, I would say about the trees, the quietness. My father used to say it was a traffic jam if he saw 3 cars on the street.
That's funny.
On the corner of Vanderbilt Parkway and Deer Park Road was owned by the Havermeyers. Their background was also with DuPont. And they had, they raised prize cattle. My backyard had these calves.
Really?
Yes, you could put your hand through and pet them. That was building up of the defense plants in the 1950s. And so therefore engineers were coming out and then they needed places to stay. So then they started building the various communities here in Dix Hills. And I believe that the first community was called Woodedge. The housing development was called Woodedge. The first street was called Woodedge Drive, and I guess the model homes must have been in there. But it didn't build up until the town put water, because everybody had wells.
The library, they had a bus program back then in the summertime. So all the kids, the bus would come around and we'd go to the library. And
By yourselves, without the parents?
You know, we were talking. I was talking about this. I was playing golf last week with a friend of mine, and he said the same thing about taking the bus to the library.
Library bus.
The library bus, and there must have been some type of monitor or something. Your parents weren't there, but there probably was like I guess a school monitor or something.
Right.
But it was the '70s. Who knows?
Right. Maybe not.
Maybe not. Yeah, but we made it back.
So did you?
Janice Woods, who was, you mentioned about someone who was an influence. She was definitely an influence on me as far as my career. She was an old-fashioned librarian, very strict. So she was someone very good to start on it. So she went back to the 1960s at the Melville Library. Of the programs that we have now, like, you know, you'll be walking over by the fiction set and the Zumba music is blasting. And I think about her, I'm like, I don't know if Mrs. Woods would be going for this right now.
It's we really have changed with the times.
It's just a different. I mean, I'll tell you a quick little aside. You know, I was like, you know, I was a young guy, and I happened to walk by her desk, and I just was absentmindedly, I whistled. She called me over. She was from West Virginia, so she had a pretty strong accent. She was, Chris, no whistling in the library.
Oh.
And I never whistled again.
When I was first there, it was this little library, and I had a cramped little space. But as the children came, I thought one way for me to get to know them, and also for them to feel that it was their library, I took a Polaroid picture of every child that came into the library and made an album of that. And they would come in and find themselves in the album.
So nice.
And it really personalized the library for them. And I emphasized for the children that this was their library as well as the parents' library. So that was, you know, that's how it was. I knew all of their names, not always the parents' names, but I knew all of their names.
Wow,
And
that's
they
so
were
nice.
delightful.
Yeah.
So one of the best things about Half Hollow Hills is the personnel. And I mean from the director right on down to the custodians. Everybody is, I shouldn't say down, I should say laterally, but whatever. But it's really, the people have been wonderful. But mainly, I would say Janice Woods. She was a friend to begin with before I even came to the library.
She was a director?
She was not, she was an interim director. She was an interim director, and then she became the Melville branch librarian. She was a librarian's librarian. I mean, she just set the stage for what she wanted, but she left her hands out of your business. She was not a micromanager at all. She was a wonderful librarian, and you just wanted to do the very best job you could do for her.
Nice.
And for Jerry Nichols, I can't say enough about him. He was wonderful. He really wanted you to work hard, and he wanted you to get up and serve your patrons. And I liked that, so so that was good too. Sharon Babcock was she was head of children's services.
And that's when I came on, when she was.
When Sharon was here, and she was so book-centered.
Anyway, I remember we had a big potato field across the road from me.
Really?
And my mom and I would go potato picking after they left. They were people who were picking them up and putting them in sacks.
Oh.
And then, of course, they missed a few, so we went each with a pail and collected leftover potatoes.
Fresh potatoes.
Fresh
That's
potatoes,
great.
yes.
So,
Of course, that's not now. Now it's the Boseys.
is that right?
Yeah.
So it was a farm, actually.
Yes. I think the name was Roth, if I don't forget the name of the owners of the farm. They owned several properties along Deer Park at that time.
Uh-huh.
I graduated in 61, so I graduated from Half Hollow, from the
East
what's
or
now
west?
the music school. No, it's now a music school, Burrs Lane.
Oh.
I graduated from Burrs Lane.
The high schools weren't built yet.
Correct.
Burrs Lane High School, or was it?
Yeah, it was a high school, and they had peacocks in the center and everything. It was very nice.
Well,
So you're
Melville
right.
used to be a school, right? Initially.
Yes, it was a little school.
Do you remember
yes.
that?
Well, my best friend, who was born in Melville, she grew up in Melville. I think she may have gone to that school. There was a school, I think a school on Ruland Road, too, at one time in Melville. I'm not quite sure about that. She would know more, actually. She went to, when I was in sixth or seventh grade, the districts combined. Then it became Half Hollow. When I went to school, it was the Hill School, and she was in Melville, and there was, I guess, something in between, and they combined 3 school districts
Really?
to make Half Hollow Hill.
I know. Like I said, it was the Southern Farmer Library was my schoolhouse, the little red schoolhouse in the country. There was nothing but potato farms anywhere. My parents' house back goes on to what's now 110, but it was Walt Whitman Road with 2 lanes, one going one way, one going the other. If you looked across, like where the mall is and all that, nothing but fields. We could see Old Country Road, that was there, and quite a popular road at the time. Very few roads, all rural. And I remember one day my father told me to come in the car with him, and we went where the mall is now. I mean, acres and acres. You couldn't see anything but acres and acres of land. And in the middle was a tree. Everybody admired that tree because it was all by itself there. And my father brought me there to show me a man with an easel painting the tree. I always remembered that.
A nice picture.
Beautiful scenes, yeah. So I did have a school bus, and they picked me up, and we had 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade together in one room.
Really?
The teacher was Mrs. Kirkland. She was wonderful. She lived directly across the street from the Sun Farm. Next to the school was a small house. That was her house. That's an old house. I was there for a while. And she raised, we call them white Scotties, but they're Westies. She raised 2 Westies and loved animals. I think just the openness and the peace, you could never describe it sufficiently what it was like compared to now. It's just amazing. We take walks up into the woods. My father and I would put our names on the trees, carve our names in the trees. We could pick berries and mushrooms, and they were edible and good. And it was just a lovely time.
Nice.
Lovely.
I can remember it was a big deal, our community library. We went over there for a field trip, and we all got our first library card. And you have to understand, back then we didn't have the technology that the kids have now. We didn't have the sports teams. We played in the woods, built forts. So the library was very important. And I remember a little bit about my father being upset that there was talk that the library may close. That was upsetting to him. And my mother at that time was working for the district. She worked in the district office, which was on Duryea Road. It was like a little house almost. And they used to write the paychecks of the teachers by hand. It was like an amazing thing. And I remember when she first had to learn the computer, she was just like, I can't do this. I cannot do this for payroll. But I remember they were upset. Even people who did not live on the road, Glen Road, maybe Old Country, sat with lawn chairs, and they were trying to block the trucks from coming down to pave it. They wanted a country. They did not want a through way to Jericho. It was a country road. There was a bridle path that went with horseback riders along the way. You didn't have the stable. That was all field. But they wanted things to stay as it was. And I can remember my mother driving, and she was nervous because it was bad weather. And something happened. We were in the back seat. And something happened, and she swerved, and she let out this little yell, and then all of a sudden she started speeding down the road, and I'm like, Mama, she goes, somebody just jumped out in front of my car.
Oh, gee.
Now, I don't remember seeing someone, and we got in the house, and I could hear her. She was like very upset, and Dad was like, well, who would be out in a snowstorm? And I can remember her being so emphatic, saying, no, he was dressed all in black, and I saw this person. Ooh. So I don't know. To this day, I don't know. We never really talked about it again. My father kind of like poo-pooed it. He didn't want to hear any more of that.
It was in November of '78. I became a full-time children's librarian at Half Hollow Hills Library in the Melville branch.
What year was that, 78?
78.
Ah.
November 6, 78 to be exact, okay? And it was like, to me, it was like the best learning ground I had because you did a little bit of everything. Because we were still at that point a 2-room schoolhouse. When you walked in, on the left would be where the branch librarian sat, and behind her would be the adult fiction. Circulation desk was right to the right, and behind that was the children's room. And that was my room for 5 years.
Where was adult?
I see, the adult nonfiction was downstairs. That's where we had our reference library. So there was always 3 librarians on in the library at the time, and downstairs would be the reference section and the nonfiction. And there'd also be a big room for a meeting room.
Oh, okay.
And that's where we had our programs. There are certain kids and certain names that I will always know. I knew the Friars, I knew the Deaners, the Galinos, you know, and they're gonna kill me, but the Friars' cousins.
Oh, okay.
I can picture the faces and whatever because they were 2 sisters, and we're, so you got to know a lot of the people.
And each year they...
When I left after 5 years, one of the parents had come up to me and she said, she goes, Miss Milliken's leaving, she's no longer a children's librarian. Did you like, how she read stories? She goes, yeah, she knew all the words.
Oh, that's cute.
She knew all the words.
I will always remember that. That cracked me up.
You were her idol.
Yes.
You know all the words.
And I know you incorporated as a civic association, became the Concerned Taxpayers of Wheatley Heights. And then we also became the Mothers Club of Wheatley Heights, all in 1980 as a result of the closing of Tacoma School.
Well, that was a good outcome, I guess, but why did they want to close it? The enrollment wasn't big enough?
Well, at that time they said this district had declining enrollment. And they said that Tacoma School had a disproportionate number of minority students as compared to the rest of the school district. So they said that Tacoma had a 23% minority population, and the rest of the school district had none.
Oh, so they wanted to integrate more.
Right. So they wanted to kind of, I guess, disperse us. And the irony of it all is Tacoma School had the highest scores in the district. And it was a very, very community school. So it had all different kinds of people there, and the children all got along very, very well. Frank Petrone will tell you, he's been around forever too. So I don't know if I can say that. Probably the Unity Fair, the very first Unity Fair, or the first or second Unity Fair that we had.
Do you remember when that was? About
probably 2000. Because I was 2000, 2001, yeah. I was a co-chair up with Denise Ham for the Diversity Committee, PTA Council. And we started the Unity Fair as a way to bring the district together.
I remember one of my favorite things was the Melville Fire Department. We had the Memorial Day Parade every year, and that was kind of like Old Home Week. Like people you would see like literally once a year at the parade. Everyone had their spots on the street that they were always in. So those are some of the things I missed. Pat Stein.
That was
I know I'm throwing a lot of names.
Sorry, but I've heard the names.
I remember going into the Melville Library for some reason, and we were talking about just honor society and the community service, and she's like, "Well, why don't you go downstairs and ask?" I don't remember. I want to say it was Elaine Efrat, but I can't swear to it. Who was downstairs? I remember Pat Stein, this person, said, "Why don't you see if you can come here, and if there's any community service jobs you could do here?" So I did a little bit of my community service there, but they were like looking for things to do because that wasn't a thing back then like it is now. So.
Right.
I can remember when I was a kid, we would go to where the Walt Whitman Mall was, and that was just a farm, and we'd go see the fireworks there.
Is
and
that
now,
right?
Obviously, there's
that whole big area was a farm.
That was a big farm, yeah. So and the same thing south of the expressway on 110. Those were all farms before the office buildings were built. So I can remember that back as a kid. Mount Misery was actually named because the farmers used to have to climb this hill. I don't know if you're familiar, but Mount Misery and Janes Hill are the highest points on Long Island. They're about 350 feet high. So that's the largest point on Long Island. So the farmers would go over this hill, and that's why they named it Mount Misery, because it was a very hard hill to get over. They were pulling horses and stuff like that. We used to go to, we used to take it from Sunquam. We used to go across the street to the library. And I don't know if you're familiar with who the librarian was at Sunquam. I don't know if you ever heard the name Mrs. Healy. Mrs.
We've
Healy
heard the
was,
name.
yeah, well, she was an institution at Sunquam School. She was there for forever, but she was and she would take us across the street,
Aw.
even from the school library. She would take us across to the main library
That's so nice.
as a little bit of a trip.
Yeah.
So I always remember going down those steps to go to the basement to that. So that was like a little thing, and my mother would bring us there and stuff like that.
We lived in the original neighborhood of Melville, which is at 110 Old Country Road, and going
West.
going
Right near-
east. No, going
going east.
going east.
So close to the Melville branch.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's in here.
Okay.
When we were growing up, down where is now the office buildings and 110 corridor, etc. Those were next to us was the sod farm, which covered a large area. The back of the neighborhood was stopped at around I think at Bainbridge.
Okay.
And we used to sneak into the sod farm and play.
Now, was the
on there.
sod farm part of your property, your parents' property?
No, it was part of the neighborhood. It abutted the neighborhood.
Ah.
So, so we used to play there, and it was the greatest day for us when we got to go and get our first library card.
Oh, really? I wonder how old you were then. Were you in school yet?
I think we were maybe 5 or 6, something like that.
So your mom took you, or the school took you?
No, my mom took us.
I started school in the library. It was my first.
The Melville building.
The Melville building was my first was the library. Then Sunquam School for the first 6 years. I remember the little room in the.
It was just one class?
It was 2 classes. I believe we had 1 on each side.
2 kindergartens?
Yeah, 2 kindergartens. And that's before I think they built the kindergartens in back of Sunquam, up the hill. I guess really the fire department, because that was the best time of my life. Going down there, my father would take me down. He was a chief. I was a chief at one point. I remember the first fair they took me to. I don't know if you remember, Wise Eyes used to be the old firehouse.
Oh, no.
Okay, and right next door there was the Clock Tavern, right? And we had a lot there. We had our first fair there. I think it was in the 50s, 57, 58. And they had Miss Reingold was there, from Reingold Beer.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah. Funny, Mrs. Friedank lives. I live on Old Country Road. She lived across the street from us, and she used to just tell us stories about Teddy Roosevelt would come down Old Country Road riding his horse, stop in front of her house,
Oh, my gosh.
have the horse bow.
Well,
right?
you're kidding.
No, well, the old post office was there too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. She was around for that? No.
Mrs. Friedank, not me.
No. Oh, that's what I mean.
Yeah, she was around for that.
Well, I went to every school in the district, just about.
Wow.
I can explain that to
Yes,
you if you'd like
please
to know
do.
about that.
Yeah.
Okay. In kindergarten, I was in Sunquam in the main building. In first grade, I was in the Melville Library when it was a 2-room schoolhouse, and it was called the Melville School, and I was in one of those small classrooms. Then in second grade, I was in another small 2-room schoolhouse on Duryea Road, down from the bigger Sweet Hollow School. It was a 2-room schoolhouse that had a little bell in the middle, and in the back was part of the old Vanderbilt Motor Parkway. There was one of the bridges back there. You can still see that remnant of it now. It's off Maxis Road now. So that's kind of where it was. I can place where it was now. It was torn down a long time ago. Then I think in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade, I was in Sunquam, because that was kind of my home school.
Back to Sunquam.
Back to Sunquam. In 7th grade, they had no place to put us because the population was getting bigger. So they put the whole 7th grade class into Sweet Hollow School. And then I was trying
What was there at Sweet Hollow?
It was also an elementary school at
Oh.
the time, but they did have extra room, so they could take the whole 7th grade class from the district and put them there.
Oh, nice.
So we got to know everyone from the people from Sweet Hollow and the people from Hills. Those were the only 3 schools in the district at the time. Then, 8th grade was kind of a weird year. I was trying to check with my sister. Part of it was split session. So she was 3 years older than I was, so she kind of went in the morning, and then I went in the afternoon. So she went from like 7 to 11 maybe, and I remember going from 12 to 4. Or so I'd get home and it would be totally dark in the winter. And then at some point, they were able to open up Manasquan, so they took my class and dumped us in Manasquan for, I think, half a year, because it had just opened and they had some space there. Then by 9th grade, my sister was a senior, so she was the first class that actually went into high school east. And then Burrs Lane became a junior high, and we went into 9th grade in the junior high.
Oh.
So it was weird.
And then you went to East.
Then after that, we went to, it wasn't East, it was just Half Hollow Hills High School.
Right, just the one.
Just the one, the smaller part. And when I was a senior, they started building the extension to it because everything was getting